Today is the 21st day of the month of Kislev. Since Chanukah is coming up in a few days, and we're going to take a break from the chronological order of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch that we have been doing, and we're going to jump to chapter 139, discussing the laws and customs of Chanukah. Today we'll be doing paragraphs 1 through 4. Paragraph 1. Around 2100 years ago, the Greek Empire ruled over Israel. They actually ruled over many years before. Alexander the Great first conquered Israel. He conquered it from the Persians at the time, who were the rulers over Israel. But in the beginning, the Greeks were they were very kind to Jews. Let the Jews still live a Jewish life however they wanted. They gave the Jews autonomy. However, eventually, after Alexander the Great died, his kingdom was divided up amongst the generals, and Israel fell under the rule of the general called Antiochus. He now is Emperor Antiochus. He was actually Antiochus IV, I believe, and he started outlawing a lot of Jewish practices. He forbade the study of Torah and outlawed many of the mitzvahs. In order to enforce these decrees against Torah and Judaism, he made many decrees against Jews that were cruel and painful. Some were just very frustrating. For example, he wouldn't allow Jews to have doors on their houses, that his soldiers go in any time and make sure the Jews are behaving themselves. And some were outright cruel. As we're going to see in paragraph 4, that there was a decree that any Jewish girl that got married, before the night of the wedding, she had to first sleep with the Greek general. In general, Greece was an extremely sadistic, immoral, even pedophilic society, and these were the values that they were trying to force upon the Jews. So the Jews, led by Matisyahu, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, they revolted against the Greeks after a few years of this harsh rule, of these harsh decrees. And the war with the Greeks, the Jews versus the Greeks, this rebellion lasted actually around, I think it was 16 or 17 years. So initially, the Greeks took over the temple. They desecrated the temple. This all took place during the time of the Second Temple. And the Greeks desecrated the temple. They brought in their idols. They smashed the place. They ransacked the place. And after some fighting, the Jews managed to regain. The wars continued for another 15 years. But a couple years into the rebellion, the Jews managed to repel the Greeks from Jerusalem. They got back the temple. Eventually, the Jews won the whole rebellion. They won the wars, and they installed a king from the Cohen family, from the Hashmonaim, from Matisyahu. His sons took over. They took over the dynasty. They started a new dynasty, and that lasted for the next 200 years till the Romans overcame the Greeks eventually, and they also eventually conquered Israel as well. But back to when the Jews first regained Jerusalem, regained the temple. They're going into the temple after the Greeks had control over it. The Greeks had destroyed the temple, as I mentioned. And one of the things that the Greeks did is that there was the oil in the temple. There was a menorah, a 7-branched menorah. This menorah was lit daily, and they had to use special oil for this menorah. The oil, like everything else in the temple, had to be ritually pure. So after they processed, it was olive oil. So after they processed the olives, they extracted the oil from the olives. They then will put into jars. Each jar had enough oil to last for one lighting, to last for one day. And they'd put a seal on the jar. They'd have a seal on the jar of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest seal would be on each jar. Well, one of the things that the Greeks did is they smashed all those jars. So there was no more oil that could be used for the menorah. So the Jews finally reclaimed the temple. They got the temple back. However, they couldn't light the menorah now because there's no oil that was ritually pure. And it took 8 days to process new oil. So they searched around. They found one jar of oil that still had the seal. And they said, okay, fine. We're going to light this oil. We're going to light the menorah. It will only last one night. What could you do? But as we all know, that one jar of oil that was supposed to last one night ended up lasting 8 nights. Hence, we have an 8-day holiday of Chanukah, celebrating this miracle and celebrating a victory over the Greeks. That day that they found the oil and that they started lighting the menorah again was on the 25th day of Kislev, and that's when Chanukah begins. So these 8 days are days when we light the menorah every night, as everybody knows, and they're days of rejoicing, celebration, and of thanking Hashem for the miracle He performed for us. One of the reasons why we call this holiday Chanukah is because the word Chanukah is comprised of Chanu, Chaf Hey. Chanu means they rested, and the letters Chaf Hey, the numerical value, is 25. They rested on the 25th day. On the 25th day of Kislev, there was a break in the fighting. The Jews were able to rest. They recaptured the temple, and they're able to regroup, so to speak. So that's why it's called Chanukah. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2 is because Chanukah means a dedication, and the Jews rededicated the temple during these 8 days after reclaiming it from the Greeks. Because of these two reasons, there's not on holidays of Passover, Pesach, on Sukkot, on Shavuos, on Rosh Hashanah even, we have a mitzvah to have big, large meals. We don't have a mitzvah to specifically have 2 meals like we do on those holidays on Hanukkah, but there's definitely a concept and mitzvah of celebrating in general, which would include having meals also. So we have a mitzvah of having meals just as part of a celebration, but not specifically having 2 meals like we do on the other holidays. There's another reason that the Kislev brings down that it's called Chanukah, which means dedication, which is because of the Mishkan, the tabernacle that the Jews had made in the desert, the mini temple, the portable temple the Jews had in the desert until they got to Israel and eventually built the proper temple in Jerusalem. That tabernacle was completed during these days of Chanukah, happened to be also during these days of the end of Kislev, the beginning of Teves. And so we had the dedication of the tabernacle in the desert as well during these times. There's also a custom to give extra charity during the days of Hanukkah, and specifically to poor Torah scholars, because the light of the menorah symbolizes the light of the Torah, so it's time that we celebrate Torah. So you bring this custom of giving charity together with a celebration of Torah by giving charity to Torah scholars who are in need. Paragraph 2. On celebratory days on the Jewish calendar, we don't make fast days. Sometimes there'll be communal fast days or private fast days for different reasons. We can't make those fast days on celebratory days, including Hanukkah. And also, if there's a funeral on Hanukkah, just like on other celebratory days in the Jewish calendar, we don't have any eulogies. Paragraph 3. On Shabbos, on the biblical holidays of Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, there's a prohibition of doing melacha, of doing creative work on those days. On Hanukkah, there's no such prohibition. We could go to work, we could use electricity. We don't have those restrictions. But there is a custom that women have that they don't do work for the first half hour after the candles are lit. The reason why it's only half an hour is because the candles only have to last for half an hour. So very often the candles last longer. But for that first half hour, there's this custom that women don't do any work. Now, what does work mean, first of all? So it's that depends on the custom. Some communities will say work means all the things that we don't do on Yom Tov, we don't do on Shabbos. In other communities, it's a custom that they don't do work that we don't do on the intermediary days of Sukkot and of Passover. Those days between the first and last days, which are quasi-holiday, quasi-weekday. There's the rules about not sowing, about not planting, things of that nature. So that's the work that women refrain from. Not doing laundry, that's the work that women have a custom to refrain from in other communities. Again, this is just a custom. It's not an obligation, and therefore, if women have to work, that's totally fine. But it's a nice custom to keep if you're able to keep it. So why do women have this custom? What's the source of it? So like I mentioned in paragraph 1, there were decrees. First of all, there were decrees that were specifically extremely harsh on the ladies. When I was saying this in paragraph 1, I said we're going to talk about it in paragraph 4. I made a mistake. It's really here in paragraph 3, where, like I mentioned over there was this a Greek decree that before any marriage, the bride had to first sleep with the Greek governor of that area. So there's an extra celebration for the ladies that they were now relieved of this horrible, horrible assault. There's another reason also. There was a woman who brought down an entire battalion of the Greek army, which was a turning point for the Jews to end up eventually winning the war. There was a lady named Yehudis, in English Judith, who was a member of the Maccabee family. Exactly how, there's different versions of the story in different midrashim, but she was definitely part of the family. She was in a city which was under siege by the Greek army. The general over there, his name was Eliporni, and the city was running out of food, running out of water. They had thick walls, so they were able to keep up a defense, but they were under siege. They couldn't bring anything into the city, and they were running out of food and water. Things were extremely desperate. No one knew what to do, and Yehudis decided she had to act. She packed up in a bag some cheese, some very salty cheese, some wine, and she headed out to the gates of the city. She asked the Jewish soldiers inside to let her through the gates. They opened it up. She slipped through. She got to the outer, to where the siege was, and the Greek guards saw this Jewish lady coming towards them, and she said to them, "Take me to your general. Take me to Eliporni. I'm going to submit myself to him." She was a very beautiful woman, and they were very excited for this opportunity. They took her. They brought her to Eliporni. She said, "I'm here. I had it with the Jews. I'm here ready to, take on Greek life. Do with me physically as you want." he was very taken by her, and he brought her into his tent. And she said, before we do anything, I brought some food to give you, to make you a feast. So he said, sure. She brought out this cheese. She said, I'm known for my cheese. And she fed him a meal of cheese. Understandably, the cheese was very salty, so understandably he was thirsty. And she then brought out the wine that she brought and gave him wine to drink. It was very heavy wine. And before long, he was drunk and thereafter fell into a deep sleep. Once she saw that he was fully out, she unsheathed his own sword and she chopped off his head. She beheaded him. She picked up his head, she put it into her bag, and she walked out of the tent. The soldiers already saw that, not knowing that Eliporni was now dead and that Eliporni's head was in Yehudis' bag, they thought that Eliporni was very happy with Yehudis. And so at this point, she had freedom to pass through the soldiers, through the army camp as she wanted. She went back to the city, asked to be let back in. They let her back in. She showed her bag to the general, to the Jewish leader of the city, to the one that was leading the general of the Jewish army. And seeing that Eliporni was dead, the general decided, all right, we're gonna try attacking the Greeks outside that have us under siege. They opened the gates. The Jewish army poured through the gates. The Greek army running to the general to get direction what they should do. They come to the tent, they find him dead, and they panicked and they fled. Single-handedly, Yehudis won that battle for the Jews, and that was a turning point in the war for the Jews to eventually go on to win the entire war with the Greeks. Because of that, because it was a woman who brought about the victory, or was at least a very strong catalyst in the victory, then the ladies have an extra celebration where the first half hour after the candles are lit, there's a custom, at least, for them to refrain from work, to have a bit of extra celebration even more than the men. Also because there's a custom to have dairy foods on Chanukah. The Jews won this battle because of cheese, because of a dairy food, and therefore there's a custom that to celebrate we eat dairy foods. So yes, though it's not Shavuos, there's a custom of having cheesecake or other dairy dishes on Chanukah. Paragraph 4. Okay, let's get into the actual halachas of how do you do Chanukah. What type of fuel should we use to light our menorahs with? So we can use either oil or candles. If possible, however, the best thing to use is olive oil, because that's what the miracle is with. We're commemorating, reliving the miracle that happened in the temple, and the temple was olive oil, so therefore the best thing to use, if possible, is olive oil. However, you can use any type of fuel which is supposed to be like a nice flame, a nice light, so you can use any type of fuel which burns nicely. It could be other types of oil, it could be candles like it's very common to use. The wicks could be of any material. Again, if you have cotton wicks, it's also extra special because the wicks in the temple and the menorah in the temple were cotton, but really any type of wick works as well. The main thing is that it should be a nice flame and it has to be a single flame. So it has to be a single, smaller wick so that it doesn't turn into a torch like fire. This concludes today's episode. Have a wonderful day and see you tomorrow.